Hi everyone, welcome to the Action Movie Show. My name is Carlos, and with me as always is Manyninjas. Hello, Manyninjas.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going?
I want to see if they'll answer you.
Even if they were, I can't hear through this shit. No, I cannot.
That's all right. So this week we're going to talk about, as we were discussing, we're going to talk about the I'm going to call it an action movie, but realistically it's kind of an action spy movie. So directed by Steven Soderbergh, it was Haywire, starring Gina Carano, 2011 film. My lovely assistant will show off the case there. There it is. It's lovely. But as you can see also, it does have kind of an all-star cast kind of on the bottom there. There's actually quite a few people there. I think you've got Michael Douglas. I think you've got Antonio Banderas.
Michael Douglas and Tony
Ewan
Banderas.
McGregor.
Yep, you have Ewan McGregor, otherwise known as Obi-Wan Kenobi. You have
Michael
Zorro
Fassbender.
on here.
I think Michael Fassbender.
Yeah, that would be the second name mentioned on here, yes.
Yeah, so it's actually quite a good cast. Like, it's, if you look at it on paper, I'll just come back over here for a second. If you look at it on paper, like, there's quite a cast of people. I think the concern when that movie was originally made was that Gina Carano didn't really have a lot of experience in acting. But we'll discuss that in a second. But really, I think the way this movie was made, like, you have the experienced director, you've got a very experienced cast of, like, some great actors to round out the whole thing. So as far as, like, this is your first movie headlining, we've set you up for as much success as you're going to possibly get, because realistically you've got this whole huge buffer underneath you. You've got all these characters that are capable and all these people that know how to make characters are all around you in order to make it about as good as it can be. So with that in mind, how about your thoughts on this movie?
Well, and you kind of cut to the kind of one of the points I was going to bring up here. In terms of the acting ensemble here, your leading character in Gina Carano was easily the worst actor in the film. Not necessarily that it was bad. It was pretty much the way her character was set up there. Pretty much being Mallory Kane is a former Marine, so basically you have a character that's kind of a little more playing it straight, kind of deadpan there. There was not too much real acting chops that was portrayed with the way the character was done. She was capable of doing that, and in the action sequences throughout the course of the film, she was more than capable of that. I would actually say, in terms of the action and fighting sequences, this was perhaps the most visceral movie we've done to date, I'd argue, with the way the action sequences are, instead of being really overly choreographed, where basically, okay, there's more of a dance than anything else. As I know, everything that happened in this thing looked like it really, really hurt, and hurt a lot. It was very convincing, although at some points it looked like, okay, you understand this is supposed to be kind of trained soldiers, for lack of a better term, but then at certain points it's like, no, this looks more like something you might actually see in the Octagon, which is something where you might see Gina Carano on a normal basis. But for the most part, the action sequences very visceral. The chase scenes, honestly, pretty decently handled on there. And the rest of the acting cast really did a nice job in their respective roles. So effectively, you have to use everything around there in order to compensate for the fact that your main actor, her acting, obviously still needed some more work at the time. But it still did the job, so what can you do?
Yeah, I would say though, the thing is, like, I think in comparison to the people that she was surrounded by, she was going to get overshadowed anyway. And realistically, if we look back at some of the movies we've already covered, basically everything Jean-Claude Van Damme was ever in, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme has made his reputation on being, an action star, and, he's got his own style that is unique from the other action stars in the way he does it. But realistically, as an actor, he sucks. Like, honestly, movies I've seen of him, the only time I bought it where I actually thought he elevated his game to a certain point was, I think, in JCVD, where he was playing basically himself. But there, because of that, he was playing himself, including those flaws that he actually does have. So that was the first time that it actually started to kind of, you actually had some kind of a real we'd almost call it acting, but at the same time, a lot of that character was based on himself, really. So it was like he was playing himself, but in being playing himself, that was the first time you actually bought it. So, you know, great acting in an action movie is a bonus, but it's not really the top thing. Like if you look back at the Bloodsport, it was hysterical. He was horrific at times. It really the only thing he could do convincingly was make faces while screaming, and we covered that in the last one. In this case, Gina Carano is basically a trained operator who's almost above a lot of situations that a lot of people would react to. But it's plausible. I think that's where Soderbergh and having all those experienced people around it kind of helped, because her lack of reactions to a lot of things were believable if you're somebody who's trained to deal with that thing, all the type of thing all the time. And then when the situation comes up, then your focus becomes on, all right, let me get the job done here, do whatever. Focus on the mission first, and then everything else secondary. Based on that, that's basically what her character does, and that is not going to leave a lot of room for a big emotional outburst at different times. So that probably made a lot of sense in that way. So they were smart about it. They knew where the weaknesses were, and they played to her strengths. When you talk about the visceral part of the fight sequences, that was her strengths. They emphasized that, and the way they shot them is they made it so that we're going to emphasize, no, she's really, really good at this. We want to show as much of this as possible and stay away from this other section where we're not going to get as much. If we want characters to emote or to do some kind of reaction, we've got all these other people to do it.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, like I said, I think we've covered the initial review parts, so let's get on to the nitty-gritty of how exactly, or just kind of the Cole's notes for how this movie begins and sort of operates. So at the beginning, we have Gina Carano's character, pretty much the former Marine who's now working as part of this operation set up there. Basically, Black Ops is what they're really implying here, and say kind of blatantly outright. So you got Mallory Klein kind of just trying to meet up with one of the people who we will later learn basically is applied the kind of set her up for whatever everything that's been going on will be going on throughout the course of the film. Only they made a former co-worker who they end up getting into a very visceral fight at the very beginning of the film with a bunch of spectators. One of the customers who we are giving a name Scott, I think that's the only name we're given for the guy, ends up intervening, and effectively the Kane's character uses Scott in order to use his vehicle as a getaway vehicle, and the good chunk of the film, I'd say at least the first half, if not a little more of the film, is exposition of everything that led up to that point and that fight in the diner through the use of flashbacks, basically, as Kane as the narrator there, explaining exactly how she got into the incredibly screwed up situation that led her here now, in a rural diner, or escaping from a rural diner, somewhere in the stateside area. And then from there, things get a little more screwed up, even more so.
I'll interject here. I just wanted to let you sit for a moment. But yeah, no, the first half of the film, you're right, is basically her doing flashbacks, basically explaining everything that led up to that point, and then going through how we got from point A to point B. It also serves, like I said, the script writers and then the director did a good job, I think, in trying to set it up. They had her be the narrator, really, in order to explain how we got from there to there. But then at the same time, where we end up as we go along is that by the time we reach a certain point in the movie, we basically have pointed out that she's telling him all these things so that he can relay that information as part of what she's trying to do. That's really what it comes down to. So the character... Now, one thing I will nitpick about this is that I find that in the end, as his character is going through, his character has an awful lot of questions for somebody who just got kidnapped, basically, by this lady. He seems awfully interested. And then the longer she talks and explains everything, the more it amuses me that he continues to listen or to be interested. Because it would strike me that as somebody dealing with that situation, they probably wouldn't want to have too much to do with it, especially when we're getting into the fact that she's killing people and that people around her are killing people and that there's international intrigue and gunplay. The more you involve yourself in it, the more you think, well, if these people are able and willing to kill others or be in these operations. Why would I want to know about it when then they can know who I am and come after me?
It's a perfectly good explanation as I wield this weird little spider dog thing, because I too can have a prop in my hand while I talk randomly. But basically, the first explanation is exposition. Basically, need some kind of a device in order to explain how we got up to that point, in which case, this is Scott, and Scott is a perfectly good excuse for the director to have someone for Mallory to talk to in order to explain, okay, here's how I got into this incredibly situation, being chased away from this diner from a man who just tried to kill me, in plain sight of a bunch of people there, not to mention the fact that it's probably implied Stockholm Syndrome, so okay, it's not entirely out of life space. They're probably using that as a basis and hoping.
Stockholm Syndrome tends to take a little bit longer than a couple of minutes in a car ride.
We're suspending disbelief because this is a film, and films do things like that. Like we're supposed to believe that Gina Carano, I don't even care at this point. Gina Carano had all the stuff going on there, and it's just incredibly contrived, honestly. So after a certain point of how able to get away and detect all these things in short term, and bit of question, just going there, okay. Well, you'll have to forgive me, I'm going back to one of the flashback scenes. Just after the setup, as she's attempting to, or she escapes from the first attempt on her life, from, I believe it was the quote-unquote M16 agent Paul. They never give Paul a proper last name on this one as well. Okay, finish killing off Paul, clean up everything, do a little bit in order to cover up all the scars and everything from the fight there, and leave off with a bag, with a few specific goods, and they're basically just bare necessities. Only at some point during all this time, maybe during the initial shower scene, which apparently there wasn't much going on, Paul had the time in order to put a tracking device somewhere in a bag and sewn in the bag in such a way that it wasn't in plain sight. It was actually hidden between multiple layers. When the hell did that happen? Okay.
Two things. You underestimate Michael Fassbender's incredible sewing ability. Second, question. Did you say MI6 or M16?
Was it M? I don't even remember what I said. It should be MI6, I think.
I think you said M16. M16 would be the assault rifle. MI6 would be the British intelligence agency.
Okay, I probably did say M16. It meant to say MI6. I want an M16, so we could just have that. So I could have an even bigger prop than that, because I don't believe this spider dog thing will do enough for this episode. But anyway, okay, so apparently we believe at the same time. Oh, actually, no, I should give the benefit of that. Maybe the sewing thing is plausible, since apparently we had, in the give or take the same period, Gina Carano's character also managed to take the phone, which was just hidden in the bag, turn on a laptop, and managed to bug the thing so it would have a GPS tracking device, or tracking signal that would be traceable from her laptop. And, of course, they put that thing away between the time that what was the name again? Paul managed to get in and out of the shower. So I guess it's an equal amount of time and equally sneaky. So maybe that's the way that's done. But of course, you still have
magic.
No, not magic. No.
Maybe Paul's a ninja.
Well, clearly not a good one. He's dead.
Maybe he faked his own death.
Maybe he decided he wanted to be in another movie. And that was his way after all, most of it.
I don't know. I'm just saying, Soderbergh did a pretty good job with the script that they had to work with. If he wanted out of that movie, he missed out.
Yeah. Anyway, so, okay. Skipping forward a bit, okay. At this point, we jump past that initial thing, managed to ditch the tracking device, get past all these various... Phone ringing in the background. I hate to have the phone in this room always rings for an extra long time. Anyways, I'm saying, okay, so I managed to ditch the tracking device, get rid of all of Kenneth's men, because, spoilers, Kenneth is one of the people behind the whole setup. So I managed to get rid of all of Kenneth's men, managed to get rid of the, one second, let me just look up what the official name, the Guard Emergency Response Unit, so basically all of the armed officers that are also pursuing her throughout a chase going through multiple buildings, which, although seems a little over the top there, honestly, it was actually pretty well handled throughout the course of that sequence. I actually rather like that sequence. Of course, finds a change of clothes by breaking into a car, and thinks it's like, okay, I'm going to use a phone which I managed to pick up partway through. I think must have been purchased at the store where she found the tracker in order to contact my father, who, of course, everyone should have realized, and everyone did realize, would eventually be checked on by Kenneth and everyone else involved in the conspiracy. You basically think, okay, who is this person going to run to? Family. So let's call the one obvious person that everyone's going to check in on, and then slowly mosey my way back into North America. And which that point, that's where we get back towards the car narration. Where it's like, okay, explain, okay, I went into Canada, and from Canada I went into England first, got some additional fake papers, went into Canada, and then came back stateside. And that leads up to the kind of the middle point of the film where the narration is going on, and you have Scott wondering, is like, how did I get involved in this shit? How do I get out of this movie? And where did that deer come from? Which will occur just shortly afterwards.
The deer was also a ninja.
An incredibly bad ninja.
Again, fake death.
That would explain why. Was there no animals were harmed in making this film? I don't recall seeing that in there.
All part of the ruse.
Maybe it's like no animals were harmed in the course of this film, except for that one deer. He is dead. So very dead. Oh dear God, he's dead.
Hey man, I don't know what to tell you. I think it was a Queens of the Stone Age music video. There was one where they thought they ran over a deer, and then the deer ended up stealing the car. Could have been the same deer.
Well, clearly the theft went very poorly this time. And they had venison on the set for the rest of the week.
Maybe. But yeah, no, it's true. I think what's interesting, like I said, this one here is kind of in between. It's an action movie that's really trying to be more of a spy movie because the main character is a private contractor, basically, almost a black ops operative for hire, basically a mercenary who they can hire in to do different jobs, whatever the case is. And then, as you said, her handler ends up, sending her on a job and selling her out in order to set something else up. And then that leads you into a revenge plot. So the whole thing ends up being, she goes in, they try to burn her. Basically, they try to either kill her or pin her for a murder of the person that she was presumably saving in the first section of the job that she was working in, setting her up for it. And it was very elaborate in order to try to set up the way it went. And then the way it was cut, you had your two villains, basically. You had Ewan McGregor, I think Kenneth, I forget his name,
correct.
but
His
I
name
think
was
that's
Kenneth.
what it was. Yeah. And then you had Antonio Banderas' character, who was basically the other one. Between the two of them, they hatched this plan, and it ended up being executed. Michael Fassbender's character was part of it, the MI6 agent. But everything was related to trying to get this done and trying to pull it off. It's a simple enough plot, and then you're all set for your revenge. So they tried to burn her, therefore she's going to try to get vengeance. They involve the dad only in as far as it creates a set piece for her to again fight a bunch of these guys and create her own scenario. I thought it was a good sequence too, because in the end they're trying to show off how well trained she is. She ends up cutting off the lights and then basically taking them out one by one. And Kenneth only barely escapes. And then, they continue. Michael Douglas's character comes in providing a little bit of information here and there, but realistically he's basically trying to recruit her for the government. That's a relatively minor plot point, but he basically serves the purpose to set the stage for, her eventually finding Kenneth, taking him out, and then at the end of the movie you finish with Antonio Banderas' character having been tracked down by her, and then he sees her, and the last line of the movie is the same as the first line of the movie. First line of the movie is Gina Carano saying shit, and the last line of the movie is Antonio Banderas saying shit. So you have gloriously bookend dialogue. First line of the movie, last line of the movie. And I don't think it's too often that you actually get that for that to actually happen that way.
I had actually forgotten that part, but I do have to add one thing about Michael Douglas's character, which forgive me if I'm butchering the name. I believe it's Koblenz.
I'm not sure. It could be.
Yeah. One second. Well, I know it's Koblenz or something. It's something close to that. Technically, he's the one who, after initially being contacted by Gina's character, ended up contacting Kenneth in order to suggest reaching out to the father. So technically, it was him who involved the father, or at least the initial part to get the father involved in one way or another. Although he explains that off later in the film, that realistically it was so that Kane's character, or I should really say Malloy Kane's character, would then be able to track them all down to the father's location and take them all at once, which is honestly either really risky or rather suspect, depending on how you look at it.
Well, he's playing a government agent, really. If you're going to be a good government agent, you're basically playing all sides at the same time. So, and whoever wins, you side with them.
Yeah. It's very serpentine however you look at it, even though at the end he was still trying to either get someone in order to work with him at the end. Whoever survived, basically, would be he would be doing business with at the end. And when it became more clear that Malloy Kane was going to be it, that's when added the last bit of information of where to track down Kenneth to help tie up the last of the loose ends.
Are you trying to say Mallory Kane? Or Mallory Kane? Or Malloy Kane?
I think I've said so many different times because I keep looking at the wrong Kane when I kind of flip over my notes over here. But since I did it digitally rather than my standard one, the name is Mallory Kane. That is the name I've been looking for this whole time, as now I flipped to the wrong window again. Okay, now I can see you again. Yeah, no, it's Mallory Kane. And generally, he's only helped. This character played by Michael Douglas is only helpful when he needs to be and when it suits him, which actually makes him one of the more entertaining parts of the film. Although he doesn't appear nearly enough, I'm going to be honest. It's the same.
Well, I think for the way the movie was done, it works out. Like he is a complimentary character. I think it's interesting that I think they wanted very carefully to stay on the plot. The plot isn't overly complicated, but there's enough to it where it's like, okay, no, there's something to follow. Everybody's got an agenda. You can kind of figure it out as you go along. It doesn't throw you that far offline, and you can kind of figure it out. Michael Douglas's character would be kind of interesting. I think almost in the back of your mind, unfortunately, it didn't work out. I don't think the movie made enough money in the box office. It did okay. It did lose money technically, but it didn't cost a ridiculous amount to make, number one. So they probably got it back in home video sales. If it had done better, I almost feel like they could have justified having a sequel, because given that she was a freelancer, you could have had Michael Douglas's character come back, and you could have had a thing where they're doing maybe a couple of movies and explore those characters a little bit more. There was enough there to at least make it. You could have come up with something, a little mini franchise, a couple of movies. Just give her some adventure to go off on. You can do some globetrotting and make it interesting. Could have happened, but it's Hollywood. If you make enough money, you go for it. For what it was, I think it was very interesting, considering the restraints they put themselves under. They didn't go crazy on the budget, and at the same time, they also didn't try to be overly ambitious. They did try to play to Gina Carano's strengths and try to accentuate those while staying away from her weaknesses as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that's generally a very fair thing, and just generally looking up, while it made an okay amount of money overall. Let me see if let me dig up once again, the actual figure. Within the United States, it earned $18.9 million and $32.4 million worldwide. Unfortunately, there are no figures given towards exactly how much it made or how much it would have made in kind of either DVD or basically home media sales, where that's not been given. But the budget was approximately $25 million. So basically, it needed the Yeah, it needed the worldwide in order to make the money back. It did make its money back, but generally the response was kind of so-so, at least based on the things I've been seeing up to this point. So, while technically, did it make money? Yes. Did it make a lot of money? In relative terms, especially in Hollywood, not enough for them to want to do it again. And it didn't receive enough positive praise in order for them to consider taking another risk on it. So I can see why we haven't seen anything else or no kind of a Haywire series at this point. I can see why that didn't occur.
Yeah, but I think that pretty much covers the movie itself. But I will pose a question to you. This is our opportunity to opine. We can get the philosophical thoughts of Manyninjas. Let me throw this one at you. If we had done almost the exact same movie, because the thing is, the plot wasn't as complex realistically, because we were trying to stay away from being too complicated. If we had gotten Matt Damon to do this movie, and he had played it almost like he played the Bourne movies, because it's similar, the idea of the character is running away from something because they had been set up for this, that, and the other thing, and now they're trying to catch up to someone. In Haywire, they self-contained it. There was no amnesia element to it. They didn't want to go that far because it would have made it more complicated. And with the Bourne series, you already had the full storyline. You had this big, long storyline. Ludlum had already written it out. You could follow it or you could adjust it, but you already had it. This one, you tried to come up with a self-contained story. But you have two things that are going against it. One, she was not an experienced actress, so you didn't want to go too far. You didn't want to push it too far. She had the physicality element, which Matt Damon had to acquire, so she already had it coming in. But at the same time, when's the last time you had an action movie series? There aren't too many. There have been a few, but there aren't too many where you've got an action movie series with a female lead. So even if she had the acting chops, you take someone like an Uma Thurman, who had the Kill Bill movies, but she also had Quentin Tarantino, who was fully committed to making that two parts right from the get-go. And you also had David Carradine, you had Lucy Liu, you had lots of very good actors, again, very good actors to surround. Uma Thurman, though, was much more polished as an actress. She didn't come in with the physicality of a Gina Carano, but she was able to make it look good. And then you had the stylistic elements of a Quentin Tarantino. The problem is, if you had come in and basically gotten Matt Damon to do the same movie, would it have made more money? And would we have seen a series out of it anyway?
Would it have made more money? Due to name recognition alone, I would say yes. Just on that alone, actually.
Yeah,
I can't say, especially with how the Bourne character is played. Admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen any of the Bourne films, but in terms of how the initial character's portrayal is set up there, I don't recall the acting required for that one being too much more of an advancement over what Gina Carano did for her role here. I can't say it's... In fact, it's fairly similar, aside from the fact that this character actually could remember what's going on. It was like, there's a full recollection there, as opposed to, I'm an amnesiac, and I'm not sure what's going on, and I will only learn it as the films progress.
Yeah. So in effect, though, basically what you're saying is the only major difference here is that the first one had a more fleshed out plot because we had a full story. With the Bourne movies, we already knew. If you had read the books, you'd have a pretty good idea where they could go with it if they chose to do so. But you had it. You had the template already. With this other one, you tried to create a self-contained story, but your main character, the person playing your main character, didn't necessarily have the same name recognition. So the movie was entirely based on the strength of almost the shiny box that it was in. Because it wasn't shiny enough, and you didn't have as much experience with it, you didn't want to go after it to the same degree. Sorry, I've actually had you on the screen for a while there. Yeah. I forgot to switch it. Yeah. But it was because you didn't have the familiar package necessarily. We already knew who Matt Damon was when they started doing those movies. Those movies did very well and elevated what he was doing. But Gina Carano doesn't have the same pedigree. People who know who Gina Carano is know who Gina Carano is. But if you didn't know going in, afterwards you might be impressed that, oh, look at the action scenes that she did. but you weren't going to be wowed by her acting. But the physicality and the action scenes that she was doing could impress you. So she could have sold you on it. The problem is you had to see it in the first place. You didn't already have some knowledge of the person going in.
Yeah, realistically, if you had a handful more movies under Gina Carano's belt, this wouldn't be a conversation we'd be having. But actually what I was suggesting there is, not only would, of course, in the case of Matt Damon there, especially considering the other stuff he had done up to that point, yes, there would be more money, specifically on name brand alone, but I'd also imply in this case, if you had another female lead, even if necessarily as polished in the physical aspect, because clearly Gina Carano was trained as an MMA fighter, she was physically more than capable of the skill going. They're probably one of the more skilled people on the actual set itself, if not the most. But if you had a more capable actress filling in the same role, even if the physical role wasn't quite up to the same level, I would safely assume it wouldn't be in most cases unless there's extensive training involved. I think a more recognizable or a more polished actress would have done the same thing and resulted in a more recognized role, and we might actually be talking sequel work, at least one or two extra films, maybe at least one, rather than this one where it's literally the self-contained thing, and this would be the first and last we heard of it, basically.
That's a bit of a shame, though, because the thing is, in the way the movie was done, I don't know if you had gotten a more seasoned actress in there that they would have had to find an excuse for the more seasoned actress to do something, because there's only really one or two scenes where she would be required to emote anything.
They probably would have thought more of an excuse. If anything, I'm not sure how much the script was done before some of the roles came in, but if it was tailored around what Gina was capable of, maybe things were toned down. But if maybe they realized that they had someone who was a little more had a bit more acting chops to her, they would have been able to play things up a bit more, make some other adjustments to make it work, and obviously play to the strengths, kind of what they did with Gina here. Obviously, the physicality was her strength. She was very good at that. Those were easily some of the best scenes in the film, and the most painful looking. Which, as a side note, as an aside here, in a lot of the films we've watched up to this point for the actual movie show, generally most of these films tend to shy away towards any kind of violence during women, and since it's obviously the film role, because of the nature of that, and of course of the actress's training, it's an interesting, and it was an absolute kind of a change and just kind of appalled me for a moment when I say it's like, no, they're not shying away from any violence at all. In fact, it's probably the most visceral in that aspect too, of everything that we've watched up for this point for this particular show.
Well, I'd agree. I think that given the fact, though, that they were trying to sell the character as being like a professional, but at the same time also being a character who could take care of themselves, she took shots. Michael Fassbender got some shots in on her, Channing Tatum got into some shots in her, and even Ewan McGregor tried his best to look like he could inflict some damage. The bottom line was that all those characters were, they were fighting. They didn't even pretend. Even one of the characters, I think Ewan McGregor's character was talking to Fassbender's character at one stage. And Fassbender's character, they were talking about it, and they were explaining that McGregor wanted Fassbender to take her out, basically to kill her. And then he said, well, I've never done a woman before. And then Ewan McGregor's character was like, well, you're thinking of her as a woman, and that would be a mistake. And that's the theme that they went with. Is like, don't try to think of it in those terms, because in the end, she killed Fassbender's character. It wasn't easy. It was a struggle. But the fact it was a struggle made sense. Presumably he's well-trained, she's well-trained. It shouldn't have been easy for either one of them to successfully kill the other. And that's what we got. And I think that was good.
Technically, she killed a lot of people in this film in one way or another, so yeah, it pretty much that speaks towards the competency of that character and how it's established, which is good. That's how it's supposed to be. If the character was portrayed anywhere else, it would make the film less believable as a result.
Absolutely. So that's the thing. This movie is, I think, 100% worthy of a watch. We always talk about, well, it's movie if it's embargoed, but the thing is, I think this movie was worth buying in the first place. It's solid, it's well contained, it's well directed, well shot. You've got solid actors all over the board here. And the main character doesn't have to be a solid actor for this to work. The main character only had to be able to deliver the lines and do the action sequences. And Gina Carano was able to do that without a single problem. This movie is worthy of a watch. Definitely, I would recommend it without a problem, without any hesitation.
All right. Well, pretty much on that note, that does kind of bring a point. Usually, if one or both of us mention it, if it's available cheap, then yeah, feel free to pick it up. But you know what? I'm going to say something slightly different this time. Basically, well, if you can, rather than whatever. To be honest, this was the first time I watched this film. Did I enjoy it? Yes. This will also be the last time I'm watching this film. Because honestly, as nice as it was, and all the things I've said back and forth over this review for it, I can't honestly find an excuse to watch it again. It's technically competent enough as a film. It does have a nice cast on it. But in terms of the general movie itself, once is enough for me of this one. I can't honestly see myself watching this particular film again at any point. There are other films which, even though technically might not have as competent a cast as or surrounding cast on their ad, might not be necessarily as polished there because, honestly, in terms of the film, as I say, it's competent. It does the job well. The director did a fairly good job handling it. It's just, it's still really. I didn't find the movie genuinely entertaining enough to warrant more than one viewing of it.
Well, I think I don't know if any film that's more in the spy genre is ever going to be able. I don't know too many movies in the spy genre, other than maybe the James Bond movies, really, and that's for a different reason, which we will definitely talk about at some point. But outside of that, like you could argue the Bourne movies, but that's because there was enough in there, and it was a series, it was a trilogy, so you were able to kind of get this big, long, fleshed-out story. But for self-contained stories, as kind of a spy movie, once the mystery is gone, you know who's involved, you know who the head was, you've seen the revenge plot played out, you know how it ends. It's really hard to come back to it because what are you going to see? There's nothing left to surprise you. There's nothing left necessarily to intrigue you. You know, the plot wasn't convoluted enough to warrant, like, maybe you missed a couple of layers, pull some layers off of the onion. You know, it's not going to give you that. It's meant really to be, this is, you watch it, you enjoy it, you absorb it, and then you probably won't see it again. It belongs in a good action/spy movie collection just because it is a decent film. But for rewatchability, it doesn't have one-liners. It's not going to have that, and it doesn't have too many incredibly memorable characters, just a series of solid ones.
Yeah, no, it's kind of hard, to say too much more that hasn't already been said up at this point. In this case, Carlos is recommending where basically, if you can get it, sure, do it, because in terms of action film, it's a pretty good action film, but in terms of action film, it would fit somewhere in the spy genre, and even then, it would be kind of a middle of the road for the spy genre. It's kind of unfair to even bring up James Bond in this conversation, just because the Bond films do include a lot of elements there that make them, as a series, much more entertaining, and plus, there's so much written stuff behind the Bond films that it's effectively a no contest there.
Well, that was my point, though.
Yeah.
What I was saying is with the movie, if you take both the Bourne series and the Bond series, it was written. They were books. The author came up with the character, fleshed out a background, fleshed out a plot. They had this whole thing already built in. The Bond movies, only in the last couple of years, the Bond movies actually run out of source material, original source material. There was a lot already there. The rest of those movies, for the most part, had at least elements sprinkled in from the original Ian Fleming creation. Once you ran out of that source material, at least you had already established 50 years of movies, and then you had the books, and you had all this source material to draw back from. When you wanted to do like the semi-reboot the last couple of years they've done, you could. With the Bourne movies, you had the written source material, and there are people still writing Bourne stories. So there's more source material if you ever wanted to reboot it or continue it in some way. This movie was a one-time shot, self-contained thing. They came up with a very simple premise. They had their main character they decided to do. They played it out. It was very effective for what it was. It belongs in a collection. It's worthy of a watch. But it's not going to have the same staying power as these other movies because these other movies have way more behind them. We know a lot more about James Bond and Bourne than we ever will, and Jason Bourne than we know about Mallory Kane. And that's just the way it is.
It's probably because I don't really want to talk about Mallory Kane. You know what Kane I want to talk about?
Citizen Kane?
No, not Citizen Kane. It's just maybe this is
Kane, the Big Red Machine?
I'm sorry, your microphone actually kind of crapped out. Could you repeat that?
Kane, the Big Red Machine in the WWE?
No.
Kane from the Command and Conquer series?
Yes. Yes, that's the exact one because obviously, for those who are more used to kind of PC and in the later iterations console gaming, Gina Carano did make an appearance within not the standard Command and Conquer games, but actually the Red Alert series or subset of it. So that's probably why I'm thinking is like, why am I not talking about Kane? We should talk about Kane, even though he has nothing to do with this whatsoever. Kane. Also, Kwai Chang Kane, because I really liked Kung Fu The Legend Continues. Yeah, I went there.
Yep. We got there. We got the video games, we got to wrestling, and we referenced Citizen Kane.
And Kwai Chang Kane, because he will help you.
Assuming he's not getting asphyxiated in an inappropriate situation.
No, that's the unfortunate reality of the actor behind that one, or the television series that I'm referring to. And let's not talk about that one, because it's sad.
All right, we'll move on past that. So that is it. That's our kind of review of Haywire. We did want to talk about it a little bit. There were some things to talk about. In reality, there was some stuff to talk about. So real quick, next movie we're going to cover is going kind of a different end of the spectrum. We're getting away from the spy genre. We're now getting back into like an action genre back. This is going to be a little bit more interesting because it's more of it's over the top, but it's fun over the top. It's going to be Smoking Aces, which was a pretty enjoyable movie. I haven't watched it in a while, so I'm going to get a chance to rewatch it, and then we'll discuss it. So that'll be the movie we're going to do next. So if you guys do get a chance to see, watch Smoking Aces. Check it out. And as always, I will say, like, subscribe, make comments. We try to improve things as we go along. And now that we've covered that, it's time for some shameless plugging.
All right.
Commence shamelessness.
All right. Right now, I'm working on just kind of a quick video, something kind of explaining some of my video process behind my retro ninja gaming stuff and generally stuff I do for my channel, which is ironic because part of the reason I haven't updated is because the game that I'm currently playing through right now has been kicking my ass one way or another because it's actually styled after an old-fashioned arcade title, or actually is a direct port of one, which, as you know, for those who play a lot of the stuff, is meant to be a quarter muncher, meant to make you die so many times and then spend your quarters, or hypothetically your hypothetical quarters, in order to continue playing. It's meant to eat your money, basically. But obviously, since it's a now console version rather than an actual arcade machine, you just die a lot because it's still full of the cheap things that were in the arcade game. So I'm using some footage I recorded for that in order to help explain some of the stuff I'm going on there. Of course, I'm doing stuff here on the Action Movie Show. And it won't be until next month, but I'll be doing some stuff regarding the Con Bravo convention in Hamilton, Ontario, once that comes up in later July. Of course, on Twitter, I am at Manyninjas. My main website is IamManyninjas.com. And I think that covers everything, at least everything that's going to go on in the media bit, because I'm also kind of doing some online stuff, online coursework for one of my courses right now. I'm actually studying for a midterm on the side as I'm doing this stuff as well. How about you, Carlos?
Well, for myself, almost everything is on this channel. It's carlosalcazar.org, carlosalcazar.2 on Twitter. That's where all my stuff is. I will try to update it a lot more. I actually got a new phone, which is lovely. It's very it's an upgrade in many ways over the old one, but the big thing is it also lets me stay on all the social networks a lot more conveniently. So I will try to tweet out a lot more information and updates, kind of keep everybody track. So that concludes everything for us. So at the Action Movie Show, thank you very much once again. We will be back, and Have a great day, great night, wherever you are. Manyninjas.
Take it easy, ladies and gentlemen.